Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Richard Engberg and I'm an equity research analyst here at Carnegie. With me I have Ace St. Germain, CEO of Beyond Frames. Ace, welcome.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
So this is the first time you are with us here at Carnegie. So can you please describe your background before you came to Beyond Frames?
Yeah, sure. So for the last 20 years, I've been in the entertainment, video game, and tech industry wearing several hats, some of them more entrepreneurial than the others, but probably the three most relevant areas that I think most people will be interested in is I was the publisher for a pretty large media company called Future that was specifically focused in enthusiast media. One of those in enthusiasms being in video games. So probably one of the more notable brands that I worked on was PC Gamer. So again, was in charge of their P&L and building out the content for that particular target market. I was also the senior director of programming for a company called Elation, which was a joint venture between AT&T and eventually was sold to Sony for a little over $1.2 billion. And there I was in charge of all the licensing and the development of a new subscription video on demand product, again, hyper-focused on super serving audiences who were fans of video games, animation, comics, anime, and things of that sort. So obviously very familiar with that space. And then probably finally, just of interest, was also the head of content for Amazon's owned streaming company called Twitch, where I also led on licensing and then working with creators to get them connected with that licensing to create unique content on their platform. So, you know, a couple decades worth of time spent in the entertainment, games, and tech industry, specifically focused on trying to find out what audiences like and then trying to find that content and deliver to them, cutting all the deals involved, and then marketing that content thereafter. So full pipeline.
Okay, great. And can you please describe how Beyond Frames fits into the ecosystem of virtual reality?
Yeah, sure. So for Beyond Frames specifically in VRs, just to make sure everyone understands, we're focused in games. So we are mostly a gaming company within the VR space. And so if you're familiar with the video game ecosystem, the VR video game ecosystem works exactly the same way. So Beyond Frames is a games publisher, and in that way we help both external studios and internal studios with funding, and then doing all of the marketing, distribution, and sales of their games in the market, and in exchange we receive a portion of revenue for that. In addition to that, we own 3 studios, and as part of our internal studio efforts, they are working on developing games around our owned IP in addition to licensed IP. So that's where we are in the ecosystem in terms of the value chain.
Okay, great. And can you please describe how the growth has been for VR headsets during the last couple of years?
Yeah, so specifically the last couple of years, it's been rather explosive. I think like a lot of other consumer technologies, the height of COVID kept people at home, and I think the value of being able to escape to a virtual world was pretty compelling at that point. And so I think over the last year, there's been a bit of a softening since the peak of COVID. But what I can say is that from the beginning of everything, late 2019 to now, there's still been incremental growth over that time. So even if you cut out height of COVID, there's still been growth in that market. So it's been slow and steady wins the race, a little bit kind of like going at that rate. A lot of things to do with technology and also part of the economics of buying VR. But what's also interesting in terms of growth is being able to look at the partners who are now interested in getting into that space, namely folks like Apple now throwing their name into the hat. So we're seeing continued growth and interest from some of the biggest tech companies in the world, which is really promising. And then consumers are obviously following that.
Okay, cool. Because we saw a huge growth in the sale of like headsets.
Correct.
During COVID. But did like games and content for VR, did that follow the same pace during that time?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, games really leads, if I were to just throw a number out there, not maybe a little non-specific, but games leads like 80 to 90% of the reason people buy virtual reality headsets today. And you can see it somewhere in the market, like ourselves included. I would say if you asked me this about 5-6 years ago, the ability for a standalone VR games company to turn around a profit and make good revenues was probably a little bit unstable. These days, you have a solid amount of VR games companies now being able to turn around good 8-figure USD, 9-figure USD, and turn a profit in this industry. So the amount of players that are there with a heavy appetite for purchasing games is luckily there and holding. So it's really strong.
And What do you believe has been the main reason that that VR hasn't achieved the same penetration that, let's say, traditional console games like PlayStation or Xbox?
Right. I think some of it is timeliness, and then the relativity in that timeliness. So if I could explain that maybe a little bit more specifically, it's really only recently that VR has become far more accessible, and that the content for that accessible headset is becoming available. So what I mean by that is, like, early on, you had to spend upwards of 70 to 100,000 crowns to get what I would call a decent VR headset set up. Maybe some people would, maybe a little bit less, but now you could achieve really stellar virtual reality experiences for less than 7,000 crowns. So you're talking about pricing having gone down 90% for accessibility for people to be able to purchase it. And that's just really recent, right? So unlike the PlayStations and Xboxes of the world, who had a much larger head start and the ability for their owners like Sony and Microsoft to be able to subsidize the cost of each one of those consoles, as a loss-leading effort, there was no one really doing that in that space. Now today, Meta sells their headsets at a loss. They're pricing them down so consumers can purchase them. They're now finally getting them in hands. And I think we're just sort of trailing behind. I think a lot of times we like to look at current technology as all being kind of level playing field, like where they are. But the reality is, if I were to compare it for folks familiar with the games industry, is like where VR is today is kind of, let's call it late Super Nintendo, early PlayStation 1. So we're still, we're still on that hard growth path, and you're seeing it, right? So we had some exponential growth recently. The technology is still improving, and as that continues to improve and become more accessible, we don't see it lagging behind forever.
Okay, so right now, I'm looking at the numbers. You can say that the price to buying a VR headset is equivalent of buying, let's say, a PlayStation. But 4 years ago, it was four times the PlayStation.
Insane. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Okay, great. And can you please describe how you develop VR titles and how you work with licensing, IP, and financing?
Yeah, sure. So we split up our company in two ways. One is we obviously have our publishing side of our company, we have our studio side of our company. And so if I would start on the publishing side of our company, the way that we develop games there is obviously we go out and look for third-party external studios, and we go out and attempt to try to find products that are fit to market that they're creating, and then we go in and fund those and try to help accelerate their time to market. That obviously for us is really interesting, just because it shortens it shortens the time and our ability to get games to market in that way. And so we help them produce those games. We provide the market research. We lean in and try to provide them technical support where needed and get them connected directly with the distributors to try to help bridge the gap between what they're doing and making sure that it excels and succeeds by the time it goes to market. And that's the publishing side. So very business oriented. On the studio side, we're focused on two things. One, we have our intellectual property that we own, stuff that's born and bred from our studios internally, and we also work with licensed partners externally to build games that are based on their IP. That funding happens in various different ways. Part of it is internal funding, obviously from the internal publisher down into our internal studios, but we also work with not only our distributors, external publishers, and other interested stakeholders that want to participate in the upside of those games, and then we bring them into the deal as a way to sort of de-risk what we're doing there. So that's kind of it on a financial level. Now, how we choose what games we make is really heavily data driven. As any entertainment market, it shifts, like the winds kind of move left and right, and so we kind of chase down where we think the market is going to be based on the many signals and data that we collect, and then we try to meet the market with the right kind of product when it's ready to be released. So that's what we're focused on.
So in order to mitigate some of the risks associated with game development, you use, for example, external financing. Can you describe how these sort of agreements are written?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of times every single stakeholder is a little bit different. So in the case of a distributor, they're obviously very eager to get content for their platform because it brings a lot of value for the reasons to purchase their headsets. And so in those agreements, the way they're generally written, not a little non-specific about who they are, since we're not at liberty to talk in details about every specific distributor, but the way that that's currently handled is they provide a certain amount of funding against the game itself, and then there's a small recoup at the very beginning of a certain size, and then they take an ongoing rev share thereafter. What I can say today is that the amount of money provided and versus the rev share that they take thereafter is extremely in our favor. If I were to use an example, this isn't exactly what has happened to us. I'm using it just as like mathematically so people can kind of do this in their head. You know, there are deals on the table where we're able to effectively secure 50 to 75% of the production for a game, and we're only giving up 10 to 20% of the revenue on the back end. So they're very favorable deals right now. And I always joke that I'm not sure how long those are going to last. So we're going to try to secure as many of those as possible. And then in other cases, we made an announcement that we actually worked with an external publisher for one of our titles for our internal studio. And in that case, the funding for that title is actually being 100% taken care of, and we're still receiving a lion's share of the upside revenue at the end of that project. So very favorable right now. It's really.
Okay, great. And can you please describe some of the titles that you have been publishing?
Yeah, sure. So we launched about 5 titles this year, so it could be a lot to talk about. So what I'll do is I'll focus on a couple that I think are quite interesting. The most recent one that we launched is a game called Out of Hand by a company out of Israel called Capricia Productions. If you're familiar with Super Mario, I would try to liken it to maybe somebody maybe not as familiar with VR. It's like playing Mario, but in VR, where instead of running, you kind of run with your hands and leap and jump and climb and grab things. So it's an action adventure, narratively driven, fun platformer that sold very well at the launch of it, and it's made for, I would call, like mid-core audiences. You know, I don't think you could be the most basic of gamers to play it, but you don't need to be the most hardcore, and so we think it fits a really interesting market there. We'll probably talk about it a little bit later, but just to tease it out, obviously Ghosts of Tabor, which is one of our larger titles that we launched this year, probably the most noteworthy. That is a hardcore military extraction shooter, which we can talk more about. But again, that is made much more for the hardcore audiences. And so, you know, we run the gamut in our portfolio across whether or not they're casual games, being more like puzzle-driven, slow narrative-driven stories, all the way through hardcore military shooters. And the reason for that is not getting focused, I think, on a niche genre in an already niche space isn't necessarily, we feel, sound strategy. We want to build out experiences that players are asking for. That's really what our goal is, about why we exist. And so as tastes change, we're going to move with that taste and make sure we keep over-serving on what players want.
Okay, great. And this Ghosts of Tabor, it actually won one of the Video Games of the Year award a couple of weeks ago.
Yes.
So can you just briefly explain the gameplay, maybe linking it to, well, a more familiar and bigger title?
Right, yeah, so not I was going to say the title that it really is based after, which is called Escape from Tarkov. That's a game that's been in early access on Steam for a very long time. It's what we call in the genre an extraction shooter, where players load into a world, they attempt to find as much survival gear and additional weapons and armor as they possibly can, and then try to get to an extraction point to get out with all of this stuff they've just collected. Unfortunately, they have to try to get past all of the bots and other players who are trying to eliminate them and take it from them. And so there's a bit of a press your luck. I think that's a lot of fun to watch, which has also led to it being heavily played on YouTube. So I would encourage anybody watching, like, look up Ghosts of Tabor and just watch all the fun things that happen in VR to players playing this game. Again, it is based on basically being a VR version of Escape from Tarkov, which is ended up being a really good call by the studio. So.
Okay, and given the strong sales of this title, will you continue working with that studio?
Absolutely, yeah. We just made an announcement that we're planning on supporting them on their next 2 titles as well. So we're going to be the publisher of record for those 2 titles. We have not necessarily announced what those 2 titles are. But the only thing I could say is that the goal with the overall portfolio between Combat Waffle Studios and Beyond Frames is to super serve the audience they currently have, and then make sure that they have a couple other titles that can expand beyond that particular audience, and make sure that we have some concentric circles of interest there so that we can keep them in an ecosystem of really fun games that we can keep alive for a long time. That's the goal there.
Okay, great. And lastly, you recently announced that you have a license agreement with a big leading media franchise. Obviously, you can't talk about the franchise, right. But you can talk what the sort of agreement is about.
Yeah, sure. So my feeling about VR is that it is probably one of the greatest fandom delivery services you could possibly think of. So again, I took a step away from the games industry temporarily to go into the entertainment industry and film and television. And you know, I had an opportunity to go to so many anime conventions and Comic-Cons and comic book conventions, and the sheer volume of people who truly live and immerse themselves in these worlds and want to be these characters and be friends with these characters is astounding. You know, they're a hyper passionate group of people who I love to have as a consumer. And so what we want to do is we want to approach an intellectual property that had that kind of fandom around it, and see if we could put players in that world to truly touch and feel all the things that they absolutely love. You know, they find identity in these things, and so what better way to super serve that audience than by actually putting them in the world themselves. And so our goal there was to, we reached out, talked to this major studio out of the United States. We were able to secure the license after, after sending in a few proposals for how we wanted to approach it. And just for the economics of it, for people unfamiliar, the way that works is we ultimately end up paying a royalty for that license. But what we get in return is this built-in massive audience base who we feel really strongly, and based on our research, are eager to get into a game and get in a headset for a title like this. So, pretty exciting.
Okay, great. Ace, thank you for coming here to Carnegie Studio. And thank you everyone for watching, and I hope you all have a nice Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.